14 years had passed since Jacob left home. Now he had served the full number of years he had to work for Laban. By then, Jacob had a large family to provide for. He had 2 wives, 2 concubines, and 12 children. He went to Laban and said, "You know how much your wealth has increased because of me. Please let me take my family and return home." Back home, his brother Esau might still be holding a grudge against him. Jacob had no idea how Esau would receive him. So why was he planning to go back? It was because he remembered God's promise at Bethel. "I'm with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I'll bring you back to this land." Whenever he longed for home, he remembered that promise of God. Someday, he would have to go back. Even if his angry brother was waiting for him, no matter what hardships lay ahead, he would have to go home. Laban was startled by Jacob's request. "Where will I ever find another servant like him?" he thought. Ever since Jacob arrived, his flocks multiplied and his wealth increased. It went on for 14 years. Just think how wealthy Laban must have become during that time. Now Jacob was saying he was leaving. Laban knew he had to change Jacob's mind somehow and persuade him to stay. He said, "If you think well of me, please stay. I have learned that the Lord has blessed me because of you." It was the first time Laban had ever pleaded with Jacob like this. "Tell me what your wages should be. Whatever you ask, I'll give you." Jacob answered, "You know that before I came, your flocks were small. Since I have been here, they have increased greatly. The Lord has blessed you in everything I have done. But when will I ever be able to provide for my own family?" Jacob was subtly pointing out how stingy Laban had been. "You have become wealthy because of me, but look at me, I have nothing." Laban looked closely at Jacob. "Then, what do you want?" "You don't have to give me anything. Just grant me one request, and I'll keep tending your flocks." "What do you mean? Go on." "Remove all the streaked, speckled, or spotted sheep and goats from your flocks. From then on, any lamb or kid born with those markings will be my wages." "Really?" Laban could hardly believe it. In those days, shepherds were often paid with a share of the flock's increase as wages, but Jacob's proposal seemed worth far less than that. Animals born with those markings were quite rare. Laban accepted Jacob's offer immediately. "If that's what you want, then we have a deal, but let's make it official. Swear that you won't change the terms you just proposed." "I swear." "Now we have an agreement. These terms won't be changed." A faint smile crossed Laban's face. That very day, Laban separated all the animals with those markings from the flock and put them in the care of his sons. Now Jacob was left to tend only the solid-colored animals. All he could do was hope that streaked or speckled offspring would be born among them. Now let's look at what Jacob did. He took fresh branches and peeled off strips of bark to expose white streaks. Then he placed the branches in the watering troughs. As the sheep came to drink, Jacob seemed to whisper to them, "Look, this is the kind of lamb you should bear." This was a form of folk magic that was common in the ancient Near East. People believed that what a pregnant animal looked at could affect its offspring. But could white sheep really bear streaked lambs just by looking at streaked branches? Of course not. And yet, something remarkable happened. The white sheep began producing streaked or speckled lambs. More and more of them were born among the flock Jacob tended. Then Jacob took things a step further. Whenever the stronger animals mated, he placed the streaked branches where they could see them. But when the weaker animals mated, he removed them. He wanted his own flock to become strong, while Laban's flock grew weaker. Jacob poured all his energy into increasing his own flock. As time went on, the streaked or speckled animals grew into a large, healthy flock. Day after day, Laban kept a close eye on Jacob's flock. One day, he came to Jacob and said, "Your flock keeps growing, but mine doesn't. That's not fair. Let's change our agreement. From now on, only the speckled animals will be yours. The streaked ones will belong to me." "All right," Jacob accepted Laban's offer without complaint. Sometime later, Laban came back to count Jacob's flock. To his surprise, the number of speckled animals had increased noticeably. He couldn't understand it. "What kind of trick is this man using?" Laban said curtly, "Let only the streaked animals be yours." Without a word, Jacob nodded. Then he whispered to himself, "You can do whatever you want to stand in my way, but in the end, I'll still overcome you." Later, Jacob looked back on this time and said that Laban had changed their agreement 10 times. But no matter what Laban did, Jacob's flock kept growing. At last, Laban couldn't help but sigh. "I just can't stop him. All I can do is watch." Before long, Jacob became one of the wealthiest men in Haran. He owned large flocks, many camels, and many servants. But let me ask you something. Was Jacob finally happy? No, he wasn't. His heart was still restless. He had no real peace, no lasting gratitude, no true joy. Why was that? He had achieved what he had been striving for, so why wasn't he happy? Wealth had changed Jacob's circumstances, but it had not changed Jacob himself. That was the real issue God was dealing with. This story gives us much to think about. How did God view Jacob's clever schemes? Did God approve of the way Jacob manipulated the situation? Some people might say, even though everything was against Jacob, he became wealthy. Doesn't that show that God blessed him? Yes, despite everything Laban did to keep Jacob from prospering, God made him prosper. That's one of the main points of this passage. But there is another point the passage wants us to see. If Scripture was only meant to show that God blessed Jacob, it didn't need to describe Jacob's schemes in such detail. It would have been enough just to say that, despite every obstacle, Jacob prospered. Instead, Scripture describes in detail how Jacob tried to increase his flocks through his own schemes. Why does it do that? The answer is simple. Jacob himself had not yet changed. His clever schemes revealed that God didn't need Jacob's tricks to make him prosper. God could have increased Jacob's flocks without any of them. If Jacob had truly trusted God, he would never have relied on them. But he wasn't there yet. He still wasn't spiritually mature. He was completely focused on achieving his own goals. He remained the same man who had deceived his father to obtain the blessing. How grieved God must have been as he watched Jacob continue to rely on his own schemes. We often remember the God who made Jacob prosper, but we easily overlook the God who looked at Jacob with patient compassion. There are believers today who live much like Jacob did. They rely on manipulative methods to achieve their goals, and then they say, God helped me succeed. This is how God blesses His chosen people. They justify their actions as though God approves of the way they live. They assume God will bless them, even when they use dishonest means, simply because they are His children. But that is a misunderstanding of who God is. God's blessing doesn't mean that He approves of everything we do. We tend to focus on only one aspect of God's character while ignoring another. When we do, we end up with a distorted view of Him. Isn't God far more concerned about our spiritual maturity than our material prosperity? If that's true, shouldn't we choose what's right rather than rely on clever schemes? Even if it means giving up success. That was exactly what God was working toward in Jacob's life. Jacob had to change if he was going to become the man God wanted him to be. God patiently waited for him to change. From that perspective, this story is not presenting Jacob as our model, nor is it trying to justify the clever schemes he used. This story is about God's patience. The passage never says this outright, but that's what we see throughout the story. He patiently waits for immature people to grow. The God we should remember is not simply the God who made Jacob wealthy. He is the God who patiently bore with Jacob's weaknesses and waited for him to grow. As I've grown older, I often find myself reflecting on the past. I wasn't very wise back then. I can't see how selfish and dishonest I was. When I think about how easily I gave in to temptation, I feel ashamed of my own immaturity. And yet, despite all my weaknesses, God watched over me and patiently waited for me to grow. Just as loving parents bear with their children's foolishness until they mature, God bore with me. Without God's patience, my life would have fallen apart long ago. It's because of His patience that I'm still living today as one of His children. How then should I respond to such patience? Some people take advantage of God's patience and continue living with dishonesty and selfishness. Others respond to His patience by striving each day to become more pure and faithful. I keep asking myself, which kind of person am I becoming?